Prime Minister at the White House to ask U.S. President Barack Obama for a major boost in U.S. military support against the Islamic State. The conflict in Yemen draws more involvement. The UN Security Council votes on a resolution to impose an arms embargo on Iran-backed Houthi rebels, while Tehran puts out a plan for peace. And 1 year since Boko Haram abducted 276 girls in Nigeria, plenty of protests, but little concrete action to bring the girls back, and this is only part of the story.
The News Today with Lucy Aharish.
Good evening and welcome to the News Today. We begin tonight with the White House, where Iraq's Prime Minister meeting U.S. President Barack Obama and pleading for more military support in the war against the Islamic State. His visit and request comes as an Iraqi offensive completed with nearly 1,900 airstrikes by the U.S. coalition have succeeded in recapturing 25 to 30% of the territory taken by the IS. But Iraqi forces have yet to establish a firm advantage over the Islamist extremists 12 years after the U.S. invasion of Iraq and after the American withdrawal. We'll look at where it's going and what role the U.S. had in today's chaos. But first, let's take a look back.
I want to say directly to the Prime Minister that we fully support his political vision.
We can kill Daesh in Iraq, and we can stop their advances in other countries. We are the only country who have armed forces on the ground who are fighting Daesh. We need all the support of the world on this.
I would be prepared to order our special forces to take action because I will not allow these terrorists to have a safe haven.
شما در عراق فهمیدید اشتباه کردید، خواهید فهمید نه دیر به زودی که در یمن هم اشتباه کنید.
Yes, and with me in the studio to understand a little bit more about the subject is Yossi Shane, Professor of Political Science at the Tel Aviv University and Georgetown University. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. And also Senior Middle East Analyst Ali Waqid. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. Professor Shane, I will start with you. You know, I will say plain and simple, this is a little bit of hypocrisy from the United States coming and saying that it's going to help Iraq rebuild itself when it withdraws from Iraq, and it was maybe in one way or another in charge of the entire mess in Iraq in the first place.
Surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise.
Look, Iraq is a calamity. Iraq is a shameful experience for the United States. It was intended for one thing, it ended up in a disastrous manner. And now you have to navigate this disastrous manner. Notwithstanding the American behavior, however, there is also internal events in Iraq and in the Arab world in general. And these are events that have to be taken care of. What you have right now, as you very well know, we are going through this avalanche of collapse of state, Sunni-Shiite rivalry, the emergence of this deranged body of politics, which I call the Islamic State, because I cannot explain otherwise what other word I will use, destroying the artifacts of historical importance for a variety of reasons and doing some crazy things. So you're really in the midst of a quagmire. So the United States is supposed to help. The very essence of helping is you want to create what we call in political science monopoly over the means of violence of a reliable government. The Iraqi government itself was not always reliable, because of its own leaning sometimes, as we know, with sort of like with Maliki, with his own sort of leaning toward the Shiites. Now there is kind of at least an attempt to create some semblance of stability. And Obama who was the man who advocated withdrawal from Iraq, has to help in a certain manner that will not compromise his promise to withdraw, but will not compromise American vision to create some degree of stability. Now, you will help me to make some order. I am still looking for some good answers.
Well, let's try to make some order in this. Can we make any order? Can the United States actually come in and say, okay, I understand you better than anyone, I can intervene, but each time that I'm intervening, it's a big chaos and a big mess, and frankly, I don't understand anything in the Middle East, which means the United States.
Al-Abadi was part of his appointment was being result of an American pressure over Nouri al-Maliki to withdraw, and the fact that the Americans betted on al-Abadi, and they hope that he will have a different attitude vis-a-vis the Sunnite big minority in Iraq, counted very much in the fact that he became the Iraqi prime minister. The Iranian understood that they should give up and they should not insist over Nouri al-Maliki. But if the Americans hope that al-Abadi, in parallel to his fight against the Islamic State and his effort to rebuild an Iraqi entity, an Iraqi army, the reports coming from Tikrit recently that say that the Shiite militias robbed and killed and violated in Tikrit did not add to the reputation of Haidar al-Abadi. He was considered as another Shiite Iraqi leader and not as a new prime minister of Iraq that is bringing a different vision to the situation in Iraq and to the relation between the Shiite majority and the Sunnite minority. And Haidar al-Abadi is not less loyal to Iran and Iran interests than Nouri al-Maliki was. And in this perspective, this meeting took place. The Americans wanted to clarify whether Abadi is more committed to Iraq's stability or whether Abadi is committed to the relations between Iran and Iraq.
And to understand more about this, of course, about this division, understanding Shiite Sunni, I-24 News correspondent Shai Ben-Ari looks back to 2003 at the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq and the consequences.
Iraqi Prime Minister Haidar al-Abadi is on his first visit to Washington since taking office, meeting U.S. President Barack Obama Tuesday at the White House. The two are expected to focus on the ongoing fight against the Islamic State terrorist group. The Iraqi leader is set to ask Obama for an increase in American military support.
Number one is a marked increase in the air campaign and delivery of arms. This is vital. There has been an increase. That's noticeable, very noticeable. I'm thankful for that, but we want to see more.
The Iraqis are hoping to receive armed drone aircraft as well as Apache helicopters and ammunition, with payment being deferred. One Iraqi official was quoted saying a previously delayed shipment of F-16s is now expected to arrive in the summer. But it is not certain the U.S. will accede to these requests because of budgetary limits. The Iraqis have hinted, however, that if the Americans are not forthcoming, they will look to Iran for assistance. The Iranians have already provided crucial aid in the fight against IS, particularly in the battle for the recently liberated city of Tikrit. Prime Minister Abadi is himself a Shiite Iraqi who has been walking a fine line drawn between Washington and Tehran.
Iraq is a diverse country, and Prime Minister Abadi has gone to great lengths to ensure that the diversity of the country is reflected in the diversity of the government and in the diversity of the security forces.
The American-Iraqi relationship is a charged one with a tumultuous history. The administration of George W. Bush attempted to justify the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq in 2003, not only with claims of weapons of mass destruction being developed by Saddam Hussein's regime, but also by drawing links between Saddam and al-Qaeda.
We learned more and more that there was a relationship between Iraq and al-Qaeda that stretched back through most of the decade of the 90s, that it involved training, for example, on BW and CW, that al-Qaeda sent personnel to Baghdad to get trained on those systems. It involved the Iraqis providing bomb-making expertise and advice to the al-Qaeda organization.
Saddam Hussein.
But in something of an ironic twist, the power vacuum created by the American invasion and the subsequent dismantling of the Iraqi army led to none other than al-Qaeda asserting itself as a major force in Iraq, playing a large part in the insurgency against Western forces. That insurgency was eventually overcome at great cost, with al-Qaeda in Iraq forced to recede underground, but the organization eventually re-emerged following the U.S. pullout, more powerful than ever, under a new name, Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant. Many of the group's senior commanders today were once high-ranking officers in Saddam's army. A self-fulfilling prophecy of the worst kind.
You know, one of the most amazing things that I can still hear coming from the United States administration is saying that they want to maintain the democracy in Iraq, or to keep and try to rebuild the democracy in Iraq. And in one way or another, which I'm trying to understand, why the United States is not understanding the fact that maybe the democracy that they are talking about, that they grew up on, that we are used to it in the Western world, this is not something that you can implement in the Middle East. This is not something that you can implement after years and years of dictatorship.
Look, the entire language, which was the language of the Bush administration, Condoleezza Rice, about changing the Middle East, about creating democracy. Remember her statement, we are now moving into democracy in Iraq and Lebanon and in Gaza. That was her sort of like a new Middle East vision. Is of course now debunked. The Americans are not keen anymore on advocating democratization. They understand very much that we will settle for stability. Even in Cuba, they don't advocate democracy now. They just want some semblance of stability. Given the fact that the United States lost its power as a superpower in the Middle East, which really it had after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the question is now what? That's the big question. And that's a very fine line for the Americans. On the one hand, you understand you cannot leave the situation without an involvement, because you see what happened with the Iranians moving into Yemen, and the Iranians moving all the way to Tikrit, and the Iranians will be able to be really developing themselves as a superpower against the Saudis and against all other Sunni states. So the United States is leery about that. The United States want at the same time to suppress the power of the Islamic State, but does not want to empower a Shiite sort of like reaction that they had with Maliki, now with the new prime minister. So this is a very tough situation.
Two notes that we heard in Washington. First, Haider al-Abadi said that they are demanding an increased support of the American raids, and at the beginning of the Tikrit fight, he said that if the Americans are not willing to support the Iraqi army, can manage to get rid of the Islamic State fighters without the support of the Americans. And we saw that without the support of the American Air Force, there were no chance that the Iraqi forces would have taken back control over Tikrit. This is one thing. The second thing, the American spokesperson of the White House, said that we are calling upon Haider al-Abadi to respect and to honor the diversity of the Iraqi society, which means that they want to see the Sunnite minority integrated in the government and in the security forces. Now, the participation of the Sunnite within the government and within the security forces is almost zero, and this is a concrete issue that they can attack and touch with Haider al-Abadi. Now, the question is whether the conservative elements in the Iraqi government and regime will allow Haider al-Abadi to go that far in reconciliating the Sunnite minority in Iraq. Without this reconciliation, we are going to see a second edition, a second version of the period of Nouri al-Maliki.
I want to take this into the same point that you're talking about, the minority, the Sunni minority and the Shia majority in Iraq. With us from Erbil, Iraq, is Hiwa Osman, analyst and a commentator on Iraq and Kurdistan. Good evening. Good to have you here with us.
Thank you.
So, Hiwa, let's try to understand what is happening right now in the streets of Iraq. Because, you know, is there any trust? Maybe one of the biggest sentences that we're hearing sometimes here in Israel between the Israelis and the Palestinians is the lack of trust that there is between the two sides. Is there any trust in the United States that maybe left Iraq in a very crucial time and left this vacuum open for the Islamic State?
Well, I was going to say, when you said what's happening on the Iraqi street, I was going to say which Iraq and which street, because there are a few Iraqs today, and there are a few streets in each Iraq of them. Today we have a Kurdish Iraq, we have a Shiite Iraq, and a Sunni Iraq. And the previous government tried or thought that they can control the previous prime minister, Nouri al-Maliki, thought that he can control the country the same way as Saddam did, but he failed and failed miserably. And I think America's mistake there back then was that they trusted him. They thought that he is a man who's able and capable to hold the country together. And we saw the result, a Sunni part, a Shiite part, and a Kurdish part. Each one of them is almost a different entity from the other. Today, the challenge for the current prime minister is to put the country back together, but on a different mandate, in a different way than the previous governments that did in Iraq.
Well, how can you do it, actually? When the state is so, like you said, it's falling apart and so divided. How can you do it?
The key thing, I think, for anyone who wants to hold Iraq together is to understand that Iraq cannot be ruled by one man, one sect, one party, and one ethnicity. Iraq is a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-sectarian, multi-religious country, and whoever is going to lead Iraq should manage it and not rule it. And there is a big difference between the two. Managing this diversity is a big challenge, and I think the current prime minister means well, and he should be supported in that sense. But again, America and his other allies should not push him in the direction of holding Iraq together in the same old way. Once I heard a Kurdish official saying that Iraq only exists in the books of the White House and the State Department. That old Iraq is over, and America and everyone else, they have to realize that the old Iraq is over. There is a new Iraq today that is diverse, that is multicultural, multi-ethnic, and it has to be held together through management and through accepting the diversity that exists. In today's Iraq, the current political actors, the current military and security actors on the ground, apart from the Kurds, they seem to be at each other's throats, and then neither seems to be fully accepting. This is namely Shiite and Sunnis of Iraq.
Yes, Siwa, I want you to stay with us in this conversation here in the studio. Just listen to actually what here my colleagues have to say about that. Ali, you know, maybe one of the biggest accusations against the United States that it created the Islamic State, it created Al Qaeda, it came from there. It gave the basis to that. And, you know, if we're looking at the Iraqi situation, it is the same. It created the chaos when you don't understand, when you keep the government officials out of the game for so long. And now you see in some kind of a situation, some of these officials are actually right now leading ISIS. This is a very problematic situation for the United States of America that really doesn't understand anything with what it's doing in its foreign policy.
Lucy, first, I don't want to protect the Iraqi or any other Arab government, but the question of having inclusive societies and accepting diversities, it's a challenge that many countries are facing, even in the Western world today, when we are talking about a big Muslim minority almost everywhere in Europe. So turning societies into diverse societies, it's more than a technical issue. It's educational, it's values, and especially in the Muslim world. And not only the Muslim world is not succeeding for the moment to deal with diversity, it's also other parts in the world. But because of the mistrust between Sunni and Muslim, and because of the blood that was that we saw in the streets in the last years in the Arab world, especially between Sunni and Muslim, it became much more complicated. And for the moment, I don't think the Americans understanding the situation as deep as it is and as complicated as it is. The moment that they are accepting the Iraqi prime minister on one hand, on the other hand, they are supporting the Saudi coalition in Yemen that is fighting another sectarian group in Yemen, or other political and ethnical groups in Yemen. For the moment, the Americans are still in the mess of what they created, and we are far from seeing a clear American strategy to the divisions in the Middle East.
And we didn't even start talking about, Professor Shane, about Iran's involvement in what is happening right now.
This is the key factor here, that the Arab states have collapsed, with some exceptions, but they almost collapsed. Syria collapsed, Iraq collapsed, Libya collapsed, Yemen collapsed, Lebanon has collapsed. We have a problem here of the structure of the nation state in the Middle East. We spoke many times about it, from Sykes-Picot to now. They have collapsed. On the top of it, compounded by this, there are, of course, other things happened. First of all, pan-Arabism as a concept, Arab nationalism was eroded. Iran brought to the Middle East a new ideology of Islamism, which became eventually hijacked, or perhaps was exported to some other groups. If it's Hezbollah, or there are other manifestations of Sunni, which was Al-Qaeda, and eventually, of course, you have the question of ISIL. So like going back, retracting from modernity altogether. If you put all of this and you say how we can construct a state, it's a very big challenge. There is no interest to some, but for the Iranians to construct this. There is no interest in the America in the same manner of the oil that it used to be. So these are new conditions also were created. Under such circumstances, I think my fellow from the Kurdish area is absolutely correct. Kurdistan could be a state. It's about time, perhaps. They may have nemesis in the Turks and others, but they are already, if my friend created a university in Suleimania, this should be governed. The Shiite, of course, is a completely different story. Will they be Shiite people with Iranian, or will there be in the Sunnis themselves? Is ISIL representing Sunnis? No. Saudis are against them. So we are here for the long run, and this is not something the American can control, nor should they try, in my opinion.
No, should they try. And Hiwa, what I am trying to understand, I believe that you also heard the speech of Benjamin Netanyahu in the Congress against the deal with Iran, and he maybe gave there a really maybe a very simple and a correct example that the only two states that we're seeing right now in the Middle East is the Islamic State and the Islamic Republic. These are the ones that are controlling the Middle East, that are trying to control the Muslim world. And maybe the biggest example that we're seeing it in Iraq. It started there, and it's coming out from there to the rest of the Muslim world or to the rest of the Middle East.
See, I think everyone is falling into the trap of looking at the negative sides of everything. Looking at Iraq, we have two opposite examples. We have the example of the Islamic State, and we have the example of the Islamic Republic's influence on Iraq. But yet, at the same time, we have an example in the Kurdish region, Iraqi Kurdistan, whereby today, last year today, it did not have 1.5 million refugees of all sects, ethnicities, and other demographic groups of Iraq. They all fled the war, and they came to Iraqi Kurdistan. To this minute, not a single racist incident or hate crime has been reported in the Kurdish region. The population of the region was risen by 28% in 1 year. And the region is doing well. It has many problems, but in terms of diversity, in terms of tolerance, in terms of accepting the other, the region is excellent in that. And unfortunately, because America and the others are still locked in the old stereotype of Iraq should be united, Iraq is this, and Turkey will be angry, and the other America and the other allies of America will be angry in the region, they are not talking about the example that Iraqi Kurdistan is setting to the rest of the region, and they are almost shy of explaining, of telling the others that, look, it can happen. Islam and democracy can live together in a country, and the perfect example of this is Iraqi Kurdistan. And with the right leadership, with the right attitude, with the right attitude towards the others, it can exist, but unfortunately, there seems to be a predetermined solution of precondition in the minds of the policymakers, and they just want to apply that model at all costs to Iraq. And that's unfortunately
doesn't always work. Yes. Yes, Hiwa Osman, thank you very, very much for opening this window and showing us something else from this region. Thank you very much for this conversation. Do you agree, Ali, about maybe that Islam? We spoke about it a lot of times here in the studio about maybe Islam and democracy don't go hand in hand. Maybe it does. Maybe
it's not a secret because Islam has a different vision of democracy. I don't know. I don't want to go into theology and the science of Islam, but Islam says that the Shura is its tool, its institution to democracy, and that Islam built in has already a system of democracy, not according to the Western vision of democracy, but that the Muslims should consult, should advise the majority. But at the end of the day, there is the Emir, the leader, that should decide in every difference. So I think that this is not now the question whether Islam and democracy can go together. It's whether the interests of the ruling groups and the pressure groups in the Arab world and in the Muslim world will allow some level of freedom to the people.
I just want to show you what Barack Obama had to say about this today. Let's see.
Any foreign assistance that is helping to defeat ISIL has to go through the Iraqi government. That's how you respect Iraqi sovereignty. That's how you recognize the democratic government that was hard-earned and that is being upheld in the work that Prime Minister Abadi is doing and reaching out to all the various factions inside of Iraq. And so I think Prime Minister Abadi's position has been that he welcomes help, as you just heard.
Like always, great rhetorics, great words, great, you know, what democracy is he talking about?
Look, I sometimes, you know, I look at Obama and I have sympathy for him. I really do. Sometimes I feel, you know, like every time, you know, you get this guest coming to the White House and he has to make an explanation of something which is unexplainable, nor does he have sort of like any vision. So there is like kind of like you see stumbling on some words, you do this, the government will do that. It's the case. There is something very fundamental here. And the fundamental thing here that we have not seen, and there was some, our speaker from Kurdistan alluded to it, people have witnessed something in the Middle East. They have seen what kind of calamity can befell on them. We saw it in Egypt. We see it with Saudi Arabia. And people understand that there are also options here because we have to dismantle this kind of like problematic, unresolvable issues.
Thank you very much for being with me. We are also trying always to explain things, but not always. 2 minutes. Iraqi's Prime Minister at the White House to ask U.S. President Barack Obama for a major boost in U.S. military support against the Islamic State. The conflict in Yemen draws more involvement. The UN Security Council votes on a resolution to impose an arms embargo on Iran-backed Houthi rebels, while Tehran puts out a plan for peace. And 1 year since Boko Haram abducted 276 girls in Nigeria, plenty of protests, but little concrete action to bring the girls back. And this is only part of the story. Welcome back. The United Nations Security Council voted today to impose an arms embargo against Houthi rebels in Yemen. Russia, an ally of Iran which backs the Houthis, abstained. Meanwhile, Saudi airstrikes on Yemen continue. More from I-24 News correspondent Ayman Siksik.
The United Nations Security Council imposed an arms embargo Tuesday on the leaders of Yemen's Shiite Houthi rebels, its former president Ali Abdullah Saleh and his son. The resolution, approved in a 14-0 vote, is aimed at ending the Houthi advance in Yemen.
The United States strongly supports the adoption of today's resolution, which imposes consequences on the Houthi and former President Saleh, demands that the Houthi cease military operations, and calls on all sides to once again return to the negotiating table.
The newly announced UN embargo follows the Saudi air campaign, which, coupled with the internal fighting in Yemen, has pushed the Arab world's poorest nation to the brink of collapse. In a meeting in Madrid with Spain's industry minister, Mohammed Javad Zarif stressed that a solution can only come from inside Yemen.
It's not a negotiation between Iran and Saudi Arabia. This is an intra-Yemeni dialogue. Yemenis have to speak to themselves. Everybody else has to facilitate.
Meanwhile, the airstrike campaign continues unabated, targeting stadiums and school buildings in Aden.
Now the situation has become critical. They are using the stadiums and schools as military storage, so we must not give them a chance to take advantage of them to reorganize their operations.
Underlining the growing humanitarian crisis in Yemen, Tuesday also saw more than 450 Sudanese evacuating the country after the Saudi-led military intervention marked an escalation of the crisis.
And with me right now, safe and sound, is Paul Aslier, Middle East Bureau Chief for Russia Today, who just returned from Yemen. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming.
And well, thank you for having me.
All good.
All good.
All good.
It was an 18-hour operation organized by the Russians. They sent 2 civilian planes. Each could seat 150 people. Both were full when we came back from Sana'a. The day before, the planes had been refused entry. So as you can imagine, it's quite complicated to get the permission to land, to make sure that there are not going to be any airstrikes, that the skies are clear. And in fact, while we were there, it was taking passengers quite a lot of time to load on the planes. And there was a massive explosion next to the airport. And the pilots were very worried that we had, in inverted commas, overstayed our welcome, and they were in a hurry to get out as quickly as possible.
You know, one of the biggest fears all the time when we started first talking about Syria is we ask always the questions, who is fighting against who? Who are the rebels? Who are the opposition? Who are everyone? And when we were worried that the arms will get to the wrong hands. Right now, we're seeing that the UN is trying to put an embargo. Again, maybe one of the sides that at the end of the day, it will backfire and arms will get to the wrong side. So what is happening?
Well, that was the position that Russia had on this United Nations Security Council resolution, and that's why they in fact abstained. They had put forward a draft resolution saying that there needs to be an arms embargo on everyone who's in Yemen, that at the moment, as you mentioned, weapons are flowing freely and they completely available to absolutely anyone. What the Russians were also asking for was for a humanitarian pause in the airstrikes. Their concern is that you have airstrikes that are to some extent indiscriminate. We've had a lot of civilians who are being killed. I can tell you that from the passengers I spoke to who we took on this air flight, many of them spoke about the humanitarian situation. People were telling me that there's no fuel. I spoke to an Italian citizen who was stuck in his hotel for 2 weeks. He couldn't leave the hotel. He managed to get to the airport just hours before we came, and he was just going to sit there and wait for the first available plane out of the country. The official figures say that the country is going to run out of food in 6 months' time, but the fighting is going to continue for at least another year. So people were telling me that in grocery stores you can't even buy now a loaf of bread, that Yemen is a country that doesn't have fresh water resources, that there's already no supplies in some areas in terms of drinking water. So you have these foreigners who are desperate to get out, but what I found interesting is that a plane arrived while we were there with Yemenites coming back home. And I interviewed a passenger and I said, why are you coming home? And he said, well, in the same way that foreigners are afraid and are leaving because they want to be with their families, for those of us who are from Yemen and who live abroad, we are coming back because we're afraid and we want to be with our families inside the country.
Is it that worst? Is it like that bad, like we're seeing it from here?
It's a really good question because, you know, when you read the reports, people are saying it's so much worse than, for example, the Syrian civil war. And I didn't really know what to expect when we flew in. The airport is eerie. It was very quiet until we had that explosion I mentioned, but you can certainly see the damage by recent airstrikes. A lot of the glass windows are completely shattered. There are parts of the building that are destroyed. I didn't get a chance to actually go outside the airport, and we were under strict security, and the whole thing was in such a rush to try and get people out as quickly as possible. But I asked that very question to people, and people told me it is that bad. People told me, and I spoke to people who were Syrian citizens who have dual citizenship, that they were afraid that what was happening in Yemen was a consequence, not a consequence, but was a repeat of what was happening in their own country back in Syria. So I think we're in for the long haul to see a lot of violence on the ground.
Yes, unfortunately, not good news. Paul Sleer, good to have you back here. Thank you
good to be back, thanks.
Really good to be back and really good to have you. Thank you very much for coming. Talks between Iran and the West on Tehran's nuclear program are set to resume on April 21st in the hope of turning the framework agreement reached in Lausanne into a permanent agreement. Meanwhile, the Obama administration is continuing its efforts to persuade Congress not to take any action that could harm the negotiations. Here's I-24 News reporter Gabi Tartakovsky with more.
With the Iran nuclear talks set to resume on April 21st, the Obama administration continues its efforts to convince critics that the framework nuclear agreement reached with Iran is the best option. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry was set to brief the Senate today in hopes of securing its approval ahead of an end-of-June deadline to finalize a deal.
We hope Congress will listen carefully and ask the questions that it wants, but also give us the space and the time to be able to complete a very difficult task which has high stakes for our country.
Kerry's mission is being challenged by a potential bill that would give Congress oversight of any final accord, as well as freeze any sanctions relief on Iran for 60 days after one is concluded. For his part, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu continues to slam the agreement.
It is a bad deal, a very bad deal. It is a deal that leaves Iran in possession of the capability to arm itself with nuclear weapons, that fills its coffers with a lot of money, and that not only enables it to continue its terrorism and aggression in the Middle East and around the world, but does not even demand that it stop doing so.
Meanwhile, Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Zarif rebuked the premier's rhetoric.
So for him, the resolution of this crisis is an existential threat. Peace is an existential threat. Tranquility is an existential threat. That's why he's so panicking. And I believe people should not give him the credibility.
While the negotiations are set to reconvene next week, it is unlikely that top officials will be posing for another photo op unless substantial headway is made, which might prove more agonizing than ever.
Yes, and we'll have more on Iran, Kerry, and the vote in the Congress in our, of course, daily debate later in the show. Now we're going to Nigeria. 1 year ago, Islamist extremists in Nigeria kidnapped 276 schoolgirls in Nigeria. It was an incident which shocked the world and sparked a worldwide and unsuccessful campaign for their release. The Nigerian president, elected Muhammadu Buhari, admitted today he can't promise to find the abducted girls. But the kidnapping is only a small part of a bigger picture, as I-24 News reporter Rusha Pira explains.
1 year after the extremist jihadist group Boko Haram abducted 276 schoolgirls in Nigeria, the incident which shocked the world now seems to be only part of a much bigger and worrying picture.
Abducted women were taken to makeshift transit camps. They were raped, taught Boko Haram's interpretation of Islam, and prepared for forced marriage to their fighters. Some have even been trained for battle.
According to a new report by Amnesty International, based on hundreds of witness accounts, including 28 girls who escaped captivity, Boko Haram have snatched around 2,000 women and girls since the beginning of 2014. In many cases, they were forced to join the actions of the terrorist group.
They used to train girls how to shoot guns. I was among the girls trained to shoot. I was also trained how to use bombs and how to attack a village.
Boko Haram's insurgency has been underway for around 6 years, but the abduction of the 276 focused more attention on the extremist jihadist group than previously. Hours after the abduction, 57 girls managed to escape, but 219 remain unaccounted for. In October, the Nigerian authorities claimed to seize a truce with the rebels to release the kidnapped girls. However, the group leader denied it. The abduction sparked a worldwide campaign, with hundreds of people tweeting or holding signs demanding, "Bring back our girls." Even U.S. First Lady Michelle Obama joined in.
In these girls, Barack and I see our own daughters.
But the girls have never been brought back, and the anguish continues.
And with me from Lagos, Nigeria, is journalist Sam Olukoya. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening.
So, Sam, really, I'm going to ask you maybe the most obvious question that there can be today. With all this special and advanced technology, no one can find 276 girls?
Well, I think it depends on who is responsible for looking for these girls. When the girls were kidnapped, it took Boko Haram quite some time to move the girls out of the Chibok area. And we are quite aware that there was quite a lot of clamor from the community at the time that they have not gone far. Is there something that can be done to rescue the girls? What the military said at that time was that they have sent in troops, they have sent in helicopters, and it turned out to be lies. So the issue is that if the Nigerian military had made the effort at that initial, within those first 2 or 3 days, it will have been possible to find these girls. But the effort was not made, so vital time was lost, essentially.
If we are looking at this equation between Boko Haram and the government, who is winning and who is losing right now? Because it seems that Boko Haram is gaining more and more power from even what is happening all around the Middle East with the Islamic State.
Well, I think that the Boko Haram had the upper hand as far back as 6-7 weeks ago. But now, because of the elections in Nigeria, there was a lot of pressure on the government. And the government felt for election purposes, it should do something. And within that space of 6 weeks, the troops were able to get Boko Haram out of the area they occupied. The question then is that if it was possible to get Boko Haram off that place within 6 weeks, why was it not possible to do it in 6 years?
Yes.
So clearly, it was a case of a government which was not very concerned about the people, and it only became concerned when there was election, and it was clear that if it does not do anything, it will lose that election. And clearly, the government lost.
Yeah, and in so many different ways, Sam. We totally understand you. Back here, Sam Olukoya. Thank you very, very much for this conversation.
Thank you very much.
And we're going back to Israel. This morning, it was released for publication that the IDF Shin Bet and Israeli police successfully prevented a Hamas terror cell from carrying out an attack against Israeli civilians in the Jerusalem area on the March 5th Purim holiday. The members of the militant cell were arrested in early March. Apparently, they bought a car to be used in the attack, received weapons training, and had collected intelligence on their targets for several months. And to understand a little bit more about what is happening right now in the West Bank, with me is military correspondent Shai Ben-Ari. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening, Lucy.
So something is happening in the West Bank. Something is happening in the West Bank in a way that we can say that maybe Mahmoud Abbas is trying to maintain the, let's say, the control before it erupts.
Right. We're talking about some internal disputes, apparently. Some serious, pretty unusual unrest within the West Bank that we have witnessed, particularly over the past few days. For example, today, early morning, there were 11 arrests carried out by the Palestinian Authority itself in the district of Jenin, including one arrest in the refugee camp there. On Monday, an even more unusual case where a number of armed men belonging to a certain faction within Fatah. We're talking about an internal dispute within the organization, basically taking their weapons and blocking off one of the major roads in Nablus for a number of hours. Basically, what they were demanding was the release of some of their comrades from PA jails. This lasted for a number of hours before it was eventually, they receded, they negotiated a retreat, let's say. But these men are actually being tied to none other than Mohammed Dakhlan, who is, of course, a very interesting figure. We're talking about basically the former Fatah chief in Gaza. We're talking about a guy who has been actually hiding out in the Gulf states for a few years now.
And the biggest rival of Mahmoud Abbas in the Fatah.
Right. Abbas himself has actually accused Dakhlan of having something to do with the mysterious death, of course, of Yasser Arafat. This activity, there's some speculation that it is an attempt to reassert himself, by an attempt by Dakhlan to reassert himself as something of an alternative to Mahmoud Abbas, maybe looking to the future, maybe not the not-so-distant future, we'll have to see. There are some who also speculate that within Israel.
And you know, it's amazing that it's coming at this time, what is happening, because just tomorrow, the Fatah movement, in one way or another, is going to commemorate, let's say, the arrest of Marwan Barghouti inside the Israeli jails. And he was a big symbol of the armed intifada in the West Bank.
Right. Another alternative, perhaps, to, let's say, for the future, to the rulership of Mahmoud Abbas, who I could imagine is pretty nervous about his own status with these different, let's say, political threats. And it'll be very interesting to see how these different alternatives or threats are dealt with by the PA. It certainly is, let's say, the future is shrouded in mystery, let's say, when it comes to the West Bank, and a lot more questions than answers.
And especially when it comes right now to Fatah and what is happening in the Fatah movement and all the, let's say, the competition inside, if we can call it the competition. And of course, we will have, today we had a special interview with the wife of Marwan Barghouti, and we will broadcast it in 2 days on Thursday, special interview with the wife of Marwan Barghouti. Thank you very, very much, Shai, for this explanation. So we're still here in Israel. Engineers at Israel Aerospace Industries have developed a multi-purpose weapons which can destroy a target at less cost. I-24 News correspondent Maxime Perez paid a visit to Israel Aerospace Industries to see the weapon up close.
Welcome to the hangars of the Israel Aerospace Industries. This is where the IAI operates its Harop production line. The Harop is more than a combat drone, it is a kamikaze drone. Its mission, circling over a combat zone to better spot and neutralize targets.
And in our system, we launch the weapon from its canister, and it flies as an airborne platform, gathering the intelligence, and eventually, at the end, when the operator desires for, he can aim and hit the target at his need.
Israel has shown interest in kamikaze drones since the late 80s. After years of research and development, the IAI engineers conceived a multi-purpose weapon costing less than the combined use of a surveillance drone along with a fighter jet or helicopter to destroy the target.
We give the customer an affordable solution because we combine into the system also the capability for gathering information, electro-optical by the seeker, the electro-optical seeker. And at the end, we give him a weapon system which can hit the target very precise.
3 countries have already purchased several Harop unmanned air vehicles: India, Turkey and even Germany, which reportedly used it in Afghanistan. For its part, the Israeli Air Force wishes to use the combat drone to counter the powerful Russian-made S-300 anti-aircraft missile system, a system Iran has its eyes on to protect its nuclear facilities. The Harop is a long-range aircraft able to fly as far as 1,000 kilometers from its airbase. With its 2-meter length and its 3-meter wingspan, the Harop might play a key role in a potential conflict with the Lebanese organization of Hezbollah and its arsenal of rocket launchers.
And for some gossip, yes, gossip, is correspondent and author Ayman Siksik. Ayman, as an author, I didn't think that you are going to
Bring you a little dirt?
Yeah, bring me a little dirt. And from the White House.
From the White House. So it's intellectual dirt. We're keeping it classy. We're going on an exclusive tour of the White House tonight, but we're not going to be hanging out with Michelle Obama or the president.
Oh, we're not?
No, not any of
not
those
in their
important
bedroom?
people. No, but maybe we'll get to their bedroom through the maids and the cooks and the florists and the doormen. Those are our people tonight.
These are, I think, the most interesting details that you can ever get only from the people who are working.
And the author of this book tonight, Kate Anderson Brower, would agree with you strongly. She spent 2 years interviewing the people who worked at the White House as the help, as you would call it, for years and years under several presidents. And she brings us basically the dirt on each and every president.
Oh my God.
So you start off with some tame things.
Bring it on.
I can tell you that Caroline Kennedy, who's now the U.S. ambassador to Japan, when she was a child and her father, John Kennedy, was the president of the United States, he had the whole staff working about 48 hours nonstop to find her lost hamster around the house. The hamster was lost. The country was brought to a halt until the lost hamster was found. I'm not sure how she'd feel about the story being revealed today as an ambassador of the U.S.
Yeah, I think that it's a
little bit embarrassing, yes. But the real dirt, as always, comes from the Clintons. That's where the good stuff is. We knew it. We were expecting it.
I wonder what is happening in the purple. Yes.
Well, we're staying out of the Oval Office, but we are going into Hillary Clinton's bedroom, where the maid went in and found the bed full of blood. The sheets were full of blood because she apparently threw a very heavy book at Bill after he told her about Monica Lewinsky.
Oh, my God.
It turned out he did have sexual relations with that woman, after all. And she was not too happy, as we see in this book.
And she did throw a book at him
his head.
because he had sexual relationship with...
She wounded him very badly. Well, if she's going to deal with Iran as president the same way she dealt with Bill, we're in for a big surprise.
What about Barack and Michelle Obama? Nothing?
Well, I can tell you that Michelle Obama, she's not in this book, but Michelle Obama did say that the White House is a very beautiful prison in a recent interview. So a gilded cage. I find it hard to feel sorry for her with hundreds of maids waiting on her, but she feels trapped.
She feels trapped.
Two more years, that's it.
I lost an earring here in the studio. Maybe someone can... 48 hours for
a lost hamster.
Oh my God. MS66, thank you very much. If you lose something, just tell me and I will find it for you. Thank you. Has there been a breakthrough in curing cancer? New initial research from the Haifa laboratory of Nobel Prize winner Aaron Chechanover suggested a cure for the deadly disease may be attainable. I-24 News correspondents Mayer Belunidel and Uri Shapira have more.
A protein able to cure cancer. This is what the expert in biology from the Technion, the Israeli Institute of Technology, and 2004 Nobel Chemistry laureate has been working on. Professor Aaron Chechanover and his research team have made this extraordinary discovery.
Discovered two proteins which are linked to one another. One activates the other, but when the two of them are expressed in tumor cells, in malignant cells, in cancers, they don't allow the cancers to grow. They really suppress the cancer.
In small amounts, these proteins naturally produced by the human body might paradoxically cause various forms of cancer. Conversely, a high concentration of these proteins in a malignant tumor destroys the cancerous cells. A behavior Professor Chechanover calls the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde syndrome.
You know, when the quantity is small and it partners with P65, it is Dr. Jekyll. It can promote cancer. When the quantity goes high and there is no partner and it partners to itself, it becomes Mr. Hyde.
This split personality protein could turn out to be a real medical breakthrough and revolutionize cancer research.
Now, how general it is, to which cancer it applies, whether at all we shall be able to convert it into something more practical, it's still an open question. By understanding the mechanism, we shall be able to extend the studies to other tumors and maybe in the future, some beneficial therapeutic modalities will come out of it.
And now to sports. quick. Host of the I-24 News Sports Magazine, Jonathan Rega. We don't have a lot of time.
Hello,
2.5 minutes. Let's go.
Champions League quarterfinals begin tonight. Two matches. One, Juventus against Monaco, big match, but the other one, huge. Real Madrid against Atletico Madrid. So much to say about this game. Madrid derby, it's a rematch of last year's final, which Atletico was just about to win, but then Real equalized in stoppage time and went on to win it in overtime. The two teams played 6 times this season. Atletico won 4. The other 2, there were draws. So yes, Real Madrid are favorite, but judging by what they have done previously this season, Atletico seems to be favorite. The last game at the Vicente Calderón ended 4-0 to Atletico. Will it be tonight? I'll be happy, but probably not.
Yes. Okay, let's talk about Barcelona. That has a lot to worry about.
Yes, they play tomorrow against Paris Saint-Germain in the French capital, but the French prosecutor asked for jail time for the current president and the former one. 6 years and 9 months for Sandro Rosé, the previous president. We're talking about the tax fraud incident in which they signed Neymar for a much lower fee than a higher fee than what they said, evading tens of millions of euros from the Spanish authorities. Will he sit in jail? I think not, but the prosecutor is asking for nearly 7 years. Very big story.
I don't understand when you have so much money. Why do you need to... Okay, I don't
want to have more.
Crazy people that you love to bring us.
Yes, the North Pole people, they were jealous of their Antarctic counterparts, so they said, we want a marathon of our own, so the North Pole Marathon was run. The difference, the Antarctica thing is run in January or in December, midsummer. They're doing it now in spring. If it was raining here in Israel this past weekend, you could think what happened in the North Pole. The chill factor made it minus 41 degrees. That's
minus 41. They ran in minus 41 degrees.
Fun, isn't it?
How it's like really, it's like Nurit is telling me in my ear right now. They can't feel their legs. So how?
There was a tent in the middle. They were allowed to stop and change their socks, which is very humane, very nice of the organizers. Yes, let them have some tea or something.
I did not bark. I just asked how.
50 people did finish the marathon, though. We should give them that.
Jonathan Rega, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy.
2 minutes. I'll be back. How?